Nous avons rencontré Tim Eldred, un dessinateur américain ayant travaillé dans le comics et le dessin animé. Auteur de Grease Monkey, Tim est un vrai passionné, une personnalité telle qu'on les aime à Nolife.
My main job has been animation storyboarding for the last 15 years. And in addition to that, I've been an anime fan since 1989. And in that time, I've watched many different films and movies, and they're a great inspiration to me, particularly in my comic book work. I'm also a comic book artist, and I've been drawing many titles related to science fiction and anime for even longer than I've been involved in animation itself. My very first strip was actually related to anime, though it wasn't an adaptation of an anime. There's a famous comic book publisher in America called Dark Horse, and they created a comic book back in the mid-1980s called Manga. And it was one of the very first comics to use a Japanese influence in that the characters all piloted giant robots, which were called mecha. That ran for a few issues, and then they asked me to write the conclusion, because at that point I was interested in doing a similar comic of my own, which involved mecha. And when I submitted that idea to them, they thought I might be qualified to write the concluding chapter to their mecha comic. And so that was my very first professional work. And at the time I approached Eternity Comics, they were looking for an artist who knew about anime and manga and would be qualified to draw the Lensman comic book for them. And I had seen the film and I had seen the TV series, and so it was a matter of being there at exactly the right time to get that assignment. After Lensman, my next series was Captain Harlock. I took it over from the artist who was drawing it previously. And that was another dream come true, because Captain Harlock was not only a great anime series, he was also one of my favorite anime characters. And so, again, I was extremely lucky to be there at the right time. But the two most enjoyable comic book experiences I've had in terms of anime relations was working on a comic for Star Blazers, which is the American version of Space Battleship Yamato, and Armored Trooper Votoms. Those were my two absolute favorite anime series of all time, and they still are. And so I'm extremely proud that I had the opportunity to draw them both as American comics.
Mais comment se fait-il que des éditeurs américains aient pu produire des bandes dessinées tirées de licences japonaises? Les auteurs originaux étaient-ils au courant?
The reason that Eternity Comics was able to do comic books based on anime shows was that they were beginning to be imported into America, and there were American companies now who had gone to Japan and purchased the license to release videos in America. And along with that came the ability to sub-license the rights to make comic books and other sort of publications as a support. And so if you were a company who had imported an anime title to release on video, it was in your interest to support it with advertising, publications, a comic book, that sort of thing. And so there was already an American licensor who owned the Japanese property, and Eternity Comics could go to them to license the comic book rights from them. And so it was a secondary licensing operation. The company that had licensed Harlock was, it was called Coral Pictures, and they said they had the rights when they actually did not. And so Captain Harlock, who is a space pirate, was being pirated by a company who licensed, who said that they had licensed him from Japan when actually they were pirates themselves. When the word of this got back to Japan, to Toei Pictures and to Leiji Matsumoto, they asked us to cease drawing the comic book, and of course we honored them. So it was an unfortunate end, but until that point it was a very enjoyable job.
Tim a débuté en adaptant des œuvres japonaises sous forme de comics, mais il a également créé sa propre série Grease Monkey. Une histoire de science-fiction évidemment, mais avec un twist simien.
The ideas that I had been developing in my mind for a comedy science fiction series finally came together in a strip I decided to call Grease Monkey. And I don't know if the term is known here in France, but in America, a grease monkey is a nickname for an auto mechanic. So if you fix cars, you're known as a grease monkey. And so my main character was a mechanic, but instead of fixing cars, he fixed spaceships. And I decided to go all the way with it and make him an ape. The main character, who's a gorilla mechanic, and a young human who joins him as his assistant, and they work on a giant spaceship, and they're the mechanics for a fighter squadron. The pilots in the squadron are all women, which makes them unusual too, and so we have several very unusual characters all mixed together in this one story. And of course, when you have characters like that, you have to make it funny, because everyone in this story has a unique or unusual viewpoint, and when they clash, it's instant comedy. I kept drawing it on my own for many, many years, and finally in 2002, I was able to get a literary agent, and he sold it to a big company in America called Tor, which is one of the biggest science fiction publishers in the world. They were looking for material to do a graphic novel, because those were gaining in popularity at the time. And so after about 14 years of hard work, I was finally able to see it published as a beautiful hardcover book, and I'm still very, very proud of that. After I completed the first book of Grease Monkey, I immediately wanted to get started on the second book. I could not get my publisher immediately interested in doing it, but I found that I could make my own luck if I just went ahead and did the work anyway, even without a publisher waiting for it. Grease Monkey Book 1 is a series of short stories that all build up to a larger one. For Grease Monkey Book 2, I actually started it as a movie script. I actually did create part of it as a movie. I animated my own 15-minute feature, and this 15-minute feature is basically the first chapter of Book 2. I wanted to make it so that I would have an example of the animated version to show around as well. And when I finished that, I just continued drawing it as a comic. And so Grease Monkey Book 2 is now one large story that was originally conceived as a movie, but is now a graphic novel. My second book, Grease Monkey, is now entirely available online, and it's free for anyone who wants to read it. And my reward, rather than being financial, was emotional, because I had the chance to continue drawing my favorite story. Today, I've done many different projects for them, including Star Blazers comic books. I've helped them to package the Star Blazers DVDs and also the Space Battleship Yamato movies. And most of the work that I do now is for starblazers.com, which is the Voyager Entertainment website. And I use that as my own sort of opportunity to learn more about Space Battleship Yamato. My goal is to make this the largest English language source of information about the original And it's also given me an opportunity to continue drawing Star Blazers comics, and they're published online. And it's essentially an online museum for fans of Star Blazers, Yamato, and anime in general. Because what I've learned over the years is that, like Star Wars, Yamato was the breakout point for science fiction in anime terms. It set many of the standards that we now see today in anime and also other entertainment from around the world. And the more I researched the history of Yamato, the more I realized how important it was. And if you're an anime fan who hasn't seen it yet, there's still something there for you, at least if you can read English, because what I found is that just about everything that's happening in anime today can be traced back to something that started with Yamato.
Pour conclure cette interview, nous avons demandé à Tim de nous parler de sa rencontre avec l'un des piliers de la saga Yamato, le maître Matsumoto Leiji, également auteur d'Albator et Galaxy Express 999.
I was very fortunate to be able to visit Mr. Matsumoto at his home. I got together with some of my friends there and we all went to visit him together. And I expected it to be a very short meeting, maybe an hour, and it turned into 3 hours. We were invited into his home. We were able to ask him all the questions that we had prepared and many more. And it was a terrific experience. Probably once in a lifetime. And I'm very happy that I was able to see him.